Going live. Do, 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 do. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening. I see there is actually somebody here. So, yes, definitely thank you for joining. A toast to you. A little bit of that mead. I just added some raspberries to it. So it's not quite as clear and filtered as it used to be. Still very lovely, though. So, yes, today, my terrible printing. I haven't written on a chalkboard in so long. We're here to talk about Mr. Jimmy Emmons and kind of some of his soil health ideas from the video that I linked on Thursday. Hopefully, somebody went out and took the opportunity, listened to the lecture, maybe even watched a little bit of it. A couple of things that I found, well, incredibly interesting in that, really. And one in particular that I want to talk about was his pro scope slides, which in and of itself seems incredibly cool to me. Oh, howdy, Eric. His pro scope slides of the well aggregated soil versus the hard packed soil, that just blew me away. I want one of those pro scopes because that looks like a lot of fun. And B, it's such an obvious and dramatic difference between the two. It really does become quite easy to see which one's going to be able to catch that rain as it falls and which one's just going to let it roll off like it's rolling across the street. So yeah, that I think was probably one of the most interesting images I've seen in a lot of these lectures. And that's kind of crazy in and of itself, because I mean, it's just a couple of slides and I've seen a lot of really interesting comparisons and things, but I don't know, maybe it's the science geek in me. When you start throwing microscopic images up there, I start to go, oh, that's cool. But yeah, it is fascinating to me. So I'm not getting much feedback on did anybody get out and get a chance to actually check out Mr. Jimmy Emmons here. So for those of you who are new to the concept, Mr. Emmons is a rancher and a cattleman down in Oklahoma. I think he says southwestern Oklahoma. I missed the fine-tuning bits there. And needless to say, he struggles with water on his soil and on his property. He tries to raise, being a cattleman and a farmer, he's trying to raise, proper crops in as well as the livestock. And he talks about these 5 principles of soil health that a lot of these guys go on about. And one of these days, we'll actually do a video straight up discussing that one. But yeah, he's just very, very much into the whole regenerative agriculture movement. And one of the things that he's very focused on because of the Oklahoma factor is the water retention and just how much more he's been able to benefit from the rain that falls just by having his cover crops going. And yeah, I just blows me away. I never did, but I go back and check him out. Yeah, well, I think you'd be very interested, Eric. And he has got in the Oklahoma growing situation a setup that most of us, especially here in Canada, just don't have. Like, he can grow 365 days a year. Like, how awesome would that be? As a Canadian, my whole life, I've traveled around a bit, but my whole life has been spent in Canada. It boggles my imagination to be able to consider a summer crop and a winter crop, or if they're shorter term crops than that, even a spring, summer, fall crop, or those kind of options. Because yeah, we do generally grow in one crop at a time sort of situations, not only monocrops, it's just wheat or it's just soybeans, or actually the soybeans picture he showed was quite interesting too. But not only do we grow in those monocrops, we tend to grow one thing per year, and then a lot of the farmers here will either harrow it down so it can break down over the winter, or they'll harrow it down in the spring, or they'll just turn it over. Like, there are a lot of ways that people deal with it, but no-till doesn't really seem to be a big part of the seeding concept up here. I need to look into that deeper because I could be reading the situation wrong. But from what I can tell of the equipment going by me, no-till is not a big part of what's going on out here. And I do know the guys who run the tractors for what I refer to as the North Field, because that's the one just beyond our fence that gets leased out by the RM. rural municipality, for those of you who are, I guess it kind of like our county. I'm not quite sure how counties and municipalities kind of relate to each other, but I think they're kind of in the same neighborhood of, I don't know, being doled out and proportioned by the government. Same here, but if they plant winter wheat, they can plant soybeans. Well, see, now I don't understand the winter wheat thing too, because they grow that up here, but they grow it in the summer. So is that like a shorter term crop or something? I need to learn more about crops, but as a livestock guy, I'm more interested in learning about pasture lands and stuff, which, a lot of Jimmy's talks go on about basically the importance of keeping those plants growing and keeping it going to get the roots down there. And you're trying to retain the water and you're building up that water holding capacity. And my goodness, one of his facts there is like Buddy that he has been helping. He's got up to 6 inches per hour of rain that his field can absorb right now, which is absolutely amazing. And then the image that he showed with that was across the street. The neighbor's place has got the standard county average for that area, which is about half an inch per hour. And in this case, they'd had like a 6 inch rainstorm or something. Everything on the soil health side got sucked up and was being held by the land, and everything on the other side was basically running across the road and also being sucked up by the land. And that's a lot of water that you can hold. But I mean, he did the math on it and it worked out to like 140,000 gallons per acre that the one guy had been able to hold out of that rainstorm versus like 16,500, I think, that the half inch per hour could hold on to. That's just crazy. All dogs are smart. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see you here. Winter wheat is planted in the fall. Okay, and then it just kind of sits there all winter and it sprouts up as soon as it can in the spring. It's picked in June, early July. Okay, so a winter wheat situation would give Canadian farmers, for example, the opportunity to kind of do something at least. Because if it's planted in the fall, then that would be after probably a canola raping or something like that. I know wheat is one of the rotations in the North Field. I'm going to assume it's winter wheat, but I don't know. I should actually ask my manager at work because he's one of the guys who drives tractors for that. So, yeah, I could ask him. They just did a wheat rotation, though, and it wasn't harvested in June, early July. This one, they were still harvesting this in October when we were first getting our snows, and that was a major pain in the butt for them because, well, trying to combine in the snow and the rain just didn't work well. I heard a lot of grumbly mornings around the coffee table, but that's how it goes when you work in a barn and you work with farmers, right? You're going to hear about the weather a lot, and hockey. Apparently, I hear about a lot of hockey. So I was noticing in the comments that Eric, you got into a conversation with Tall Cedars about the whole cover crop issue, and there just not being enough time. And that has actually inspired the gentleman I'm going to introduce tomorrow, who is a Canadian like myself. And he is also quite fascinated with this cover crops, relay crops, intercropping, just kind of maximizing his potential that way. He's not utilizing livestock in his situation, which, that negates one of the 5 principles that most of these guys are going off about, because they talk about having livestock grazier residuals and just kind of getting that hoof action in there, getting the urine, the saliva, the poops, it's cow pies. But yeah, he's not doing that, but he's experiencing amazing results, mixing things up and doing relay cropping and stuff. So while it's not technically cover cropping, he is finding a way to get living roots in the soil for longer, even in our ridiculously short growing season up here. So, and yeah, I can safely assume he's on pretty much the same season I am, because he's just one province west and not very far in that direction at all. But yeah, so that's going to be interesting. I'm going to introduce him tomorrow, though. Jimmy Emmons here. Just seems like a nice sort of fellow. Apparently won the Leopold Award, which I need to look into, but I get the impression that has to do with sustainable practices in some fashion. Like I say, I really haven't looked into it, but Alan Savory was going off about the elder Leopold forest that he lives nearby, and how Elder Leopold, would be terribly upset by the state of that forest now. So I can only assume this is some sort of a conservationist prize, present, trophy, title. I don't know. Um, but what's more interesting to me than that is when he was winning that award, or receiving that award. Apparently, that same day, he got a phone call saying that there was a wildfire around his property. And we're talking about Jimmy Emmons here again. There was a wildfire around his property, and over the next, I believe he said, 9 days, they lost like some 3,000 acres of rangeland. And oh, he lists off quite a bit. There's 20 some odd miles of fence, and he just lost lots of cropland and all kinds of stuff. But he's got a policy of, whenever he can, he follows right behind that combine with his seeder, because being in Oklahoma, he's got that 365 growing opportunity, or at least photo sensitive opportunity, right? Like if you get snow there, it don't last long. It's probably melted by noon, right? So whatever, but he's trying to take advantage of that. And with this one crop that he got no rain, no rain, even though he's doing all this stuff to maintain and retain the moisture. His ground just wasn't quite wet enough. So I think he said 120 some odd days his Elbon rye was laying in the ground, even though he was right after the combine. But when it did finally sprout later on next year, I think he said like it was in April or something, he was receiving the award, and it was, about that tall, just tall enough that when they needed to move the cattle away from the fire and the risk, he had that rye there that, not the great qualities, I'm sure, but I tend towards mixed pasture for everything that I'm going to be doing. So that's kind of obviously what I believe is the way to go. Um, but anyway, he had this rye available that they could move their cattle onto, and because he could graze that, they didn't have to worry about like a herd reduction, and they were able to keep, I believe he said, some 500 head of cattle between he and his father-in-law, that otherwise would have been in a pretty serious risk situation. But that policy of planting his cover crop as soon as possible. And in this case, it still took 120 days. So what is that? 4 months to sprout, but it was still there, and it still gave him the opportunity to feed his livestock from his land, even though the weather conditions were absolutely ridiculous. So while it's an unusual application of the value of cover crops, I think it's a pretty brilliant statement. With the idea of doing a cover crop and then your crop, and then like a year is cover crop and a year is then your crop. I believe, Eric, you were discussing that with tall cedars there. That is really not a bad idea if you're willing, like, and can afford to let the land kind of go. And that's kind of what I was thinking about doing with our animals when we were onto acreage. Is just going to move. Our garden is going to be a different acre every year, and the livestock will be excluded from that acre this year. And when we're done gardening it, they will clean it up, and it will go back into the rotation. And we'll choose the next one for next year, and next year, and next year, and hopefully live long enough to garden our entire property. But that's we'll see. Here's to hope. But one thing he mentions with his cover crops, because he does do diverse plantings with those, is actual crops are very monoculture, and I believe there's room for improvement there. And tomorrow's speaker will cover some of how maybe Mr. Jimmy could still step up his game. But his cover crops are very diverse, and apparently when he goes in there with his cow-calf operation, which is what he runs, his animals can gain 3 to 5 pounds a day foraging those diverse cover crops. Now, there are a lot of things that are going to factor in there. Apparently, diversity increases the Brix level in plants, and apparently Brix level is kind of a direct reflection of the energy that's being held by those leaves or whatever in the plant. I've seen a lot of people do Brix testing on their pepper plants. So that kind of holds true. I've seen people do Brix testing on meads and stuff to kind of see what the sugar levels are because they can figure out the future alcohol content from that. So um, it all kind of seems like potential because I mean, it's the sugars in this that the yeast feed on. So those are my bacteria in this case that are producing the alcohols that I'm striving for. Whereas out in the fields, it's the carbohydrates and the sugars that the soil bacteria are feeding on to create the various other things that our plants need. So with a diverse culture of plants, we've got the diverse culture of the bacteria in there, and of course all their protozoa and stuff coming in there. It makes sense to me with all of this stuff that I've learned that the cattle are going to put on significantly more weight, um, munching down that cover crop than they probably even are just in his range land. He didn't show any pictures of it in this particular lecture, so I can't say for sure, but I get the impression looking at his cropland that his rangeland is probably pretty monoculture pasture. Now that is just an assumption, and it's a terrible one at that, because talking about diversity as he does and discussing the importance of cover crops and things like, I would like to think that he has multi-seeded his pastures and his rangeland, but everybody's doing this just a little bit different. And I'm trying, like with this playlist here and these chats and discussions, I'm trying to share with as many people as possible a lot of these different options that other farmers, ranchers are exploring, so that when we come to doing it ourselves, we have the most options to draw from to see what's going to be most appropriate for our situation. Not everybody can do all of these things. In the case of tomorrow's speaker, he has no interest in getting back into livestock. Great. If that's not something you're interested in, then that's not something you're interested in. But at the same time, maybe see if there's somebody around you that has livestock that would be interested in doing some, winter grazing to kind of get a little bit of that activity in there. There's no reason that farmers and ranchers can't be chatty and discuss with each other how to help each other out. Really, that's kind of what we're doing here on YouTube, isn't it? We're doing what we can to learn what we can and to try different things and to share the results of that. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but we still share, and that I think is a absolutely beautiful thing about the whole YouTube platform. And again, it's part of why I'm doing this playlist, to share with all of you all of the stuff that I've learned from these various rabbit holes that I dive into. And this one, the idea of keeping the rain where it falls, I think is probably one of the biggest themes that is going to keep coming up in all of these speakers, because moisture is everything. It's life. Water is life. That's not just some weird sort of belief that I hold. Water is life. Where's the life on Mars? Well, where's the water? That seems like kind of a blanket statement, but it's open to debate. Anybody wants to tell me where there's life without water, I will happily listen to where you have your information from. But in our fields and in our livestock, 60 to 90% water, depending on what animal we're talking about. Like that's a lot of water. In our pastures and our grasses, that's a lot of water. We need every drop we can get. And yeah, there are ways, as we've discussed before, of you can drill down and you can pump out and you can irrigate your fields and you can water it like a lawn and you can pretend that that's going to solve your problems and you can deny that that's draining your aquifers, but it's a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid at best. And the long-term solution is for our soils to be able to catch what they are given. So if the rain comes along and it pours down and the soil absorbs it, then the grass can grow. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Like this is not a huge stretch of logic. If the rain pours down and rolls off the ground, then the grass doesn't grow. Again, this doesn't really seem like a huge stretch. But right now, the current sort of solution to, oh, I've got a field of concrete. Well, I'll just go out there and till. Smells so good. Love me the smell of some well-tilled soil. Oh, yeah. That is the smell of microbial death, is what that is. That is not a good smell. I mean, yeah, okay, it's a pleasant, earthy smell. I've been on enough farms. It's better than a fresh cow flop, that's for sure. Although if she's eating properly, that's not going to smell terrible either. A lot of that comes down to nutrients and maintenance and diet and stuff. But I don't even want to get into that with people right now. Yeah. So if the water that we're getting pouring on our land can actually be absorbed by our land and used by our land, then it's going up. It's becoming that 60 to 90% of our livestock. It's becoming that 60 to 90% of the weight of our retail sales, or the weight of our freezer camp options. We need that water, and if it leaves the soil properly, properly is defined by Alan Savory, basically means it either trickles down into the aquifers and eventually ends out in lakes and rivers traveling through natural normal underground means, or it goes out through the plants as transpiration. These are the only two ways that water is being used effectively by the ground, according to Alan Savory. I haven't found anything that really counters that yet, so that is what it is. But if it's being used effectively, then it's either going down to fill those reservoirs, or it's going up to fill those clouds to rain somewhere else where hopefully it is falling and being absorbed by the ground instead of rolling off and taking fertilizers and all kinds of stuff with it. Eric, for my contest plant, I added molasses to the bed to feed the microbes, right? I've heard good things about that. And I had people say all I was doing was attracting ants. Never seen one this year. I'm assuming you mean an ant. Jonathan Lundgren, who I believe we've already discussed, goes off kind of in detail about basically a lot of pests can't ingest sugars, apparently, like pure sugars, like molasses sugar and refined white sugar and things like that. Tomorrow's speaker actually makes use of that fact, and he also sprays his fields and stuff. I believe when the soybeans are setting fruit, he'll spray his fields like with either a pound of sugar per acre, or I forget how much molasses he puts in there. But ultimately, that's a really, really cheap input. And he gets, enough of a return from that, 3 or 4 bushels or whatever, I forget what his number is, that it's worth it to pay for that pound of sugar, which isn't, terribly expensive. And as I said, yeah, molasses is another one of the options that he'll use for that. So it's very interesting because, I mean, that makes sense, especially at the soil level, because the microbes need those sugars and complex carbohydrates and stuff from the plant, right? That's what its exudates are. That's what's dripping out of its roots as it grows. And that's what's feeding them. And they are in turn doing the whole life cycle and soil food web thing. And, when they die, that feeds the plant. So it makes sense to have that food in there in the first place before the plant can be excreting it through the roots, so that those microbes have a good healthy start. And I'm going to say it sure seems to me, Eric, like your contest plant had a real good healthy start, run, and a fine finish. I was blown away by every one of the updates that I got to see of your contest plant. All of your garden, actually, I've been very impressed with the videos that I've gotten to see of your garden this year. So yeah, hopefully as things settle down in the coming days, weeks, months, and years, I'll be able to get back to watching more of these videos. In particular, Eric, I'm really excited for you because, as I was saying not so long ago, your channel is growing. You're going to be at 1K so soon, and that is so awesome because you're doing this stuff. You're trying a lot of it. You're doing the best you can, and you've got that government neighbor, right? So you're personally dealing with what a lot of us deal with, in that, oh, that's not going to work, and this isn't how you do it, and if you want results, you got to do it this way. And It always seems like the red tapers know absolutely everything, and anybody who's trying to do something differently doesn't know diddly squat. So yeah, more power to you, man. And I'm going to be dealing with a lot of that here. I know I'm going to be dealing with a lot of that with my stepdad when I get into raising livestock, because Agriculture Canada, that was his whole life. He went to college and university for that, and he was well trained in the old ways. And while I appreciate everything he has to say about what meat is better, because he's talking about old school marbling type things there, um, I'm I'm fairly certain we are not going to agree on how to manage pasture land or livestock. And I'm pretty sure he's going to have conniptions when he discovers that I'm just leaving my cattle out in the field. And we're going to move them every day, but they're out there in the snow. And yeah, it's Manitoba and it's snow you're afraid of, but my cows can cope. Off topic again. That does rather seem to happen on these live streams. Um, Topic being Jimmy Emmons. One of the other interesting things that I noticed in this particular lecture was his slides of that one square in his wheat field where he didn't do the cover crops, and kind of as he tracked the progression of that in later months and years, with its water usage and it compaction issues. Like apparently he had that square tested, and at 16 inches down, he hit hard pack, like just there's an obstruction there, like a rock or something, But just outside his little square where he was still doing his cover crops, that thing sunk all the way down to the handle. I think he said like 34 inches or something. So that is fascinating, because the whole, forgetting water retention and all of that, soft soil is going to be easier for plants to grow in. The easier it is for the plants to grow, the farther they can send their roots. The farther they can send their roots, the more nutrients they're getting access to, the more minerals they're getting access to. The longer their roots are in general, the better their chance of encountering the right type of rhizomatous bacteria that will help them with nitrogen, because as we've discussed before, it's not just legumes, it's not just peas and clovers that can do this. Every plant out there has a biological buddy that can make airborne nitrogen plant usable. I mean, it goes through all its stages, but there's a pairing and a buddy system for every plant out there, or else they would never have gotten to be so lush and green in the first place. Nature does what nature does, and she knows what she's doing. So no question there. Will you subsoil your pasture to break the hard pan? Nope. I am going to make sure that I've got a nice, as I mentioned before, diverse group of plants growing in my pasture, and that's just as diverse above the ground as it is below. I'm going to be looking for things that will drive down. I hear alfalfa can get up to 18 feet deep with its roots. 18 feet! Can you imagine? Can you imagine? In my side yard here, which was previously farmed out before the settlement of the town came here, because this isn't apparently where our town actually started off. But it kind of moved, and here we are now because it was more convenient for the train tracks. And yeah, our garden area and yard areas clearly used to be an old farm area. I get maybe 14 inches down, and that clay turns from just Manitoba mud to Manitoba clay. And I can work my way through it with a shovel if I want, but it's not worth the effort. Utilage radishes. Well, you've got to, right? And any root crop that's being harvested for the root of its crop is somewhat problematic when it comes to soil health. And this is one of the things that when I do eventually make that Vegetarians Are Killing the World video, I intend to harp on kind of heavy, because from everything I've heard, seen, read, all tillage is bad ultimately, because you're disrupting the soil bacteria, and the soil bacteria need to be left alone to do their thing. We need to encourage them. We need to feed them. We need to make sure we're doing the best we can to provide a healthy environment for them. But at the same time, we need to leave them the blank alone so they can do their thing, so they can reproduce, they can have their meals, they can do their stuff, breaking down the organic material, putting the carbon in the soil for us. But when we do things like root crops, I mean, radishes, carrots, potatoes are particularly known for being very hard on soil. Um, we're just we have no choice but to disturb a whole great chunk of that colony, and it can't be good. Barnyard chicken, evening, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. So there's a drink for you. So one of the things that I like about the concept that Jimmy Emmons is driving at is water retention, as I've gone on about, and cover crops, as I've gone on about. But mostly, I like the fact that he's not just saying this is how it is. He's going, well, this is what I think. Now let's go get some science that backs this. We're going to test it. We're going to find out which way it's actually going. And I think a lot of people out there are not quite as anxious to have their theories actually tested and to have someone measuring their results. And, thinking even in my case, when I get onto the land and I get started with this, I can see how that would be a little bit intimidating, like you're going to have to pay for all your tests to begin with. But when I get land, I am going to pay for a few tests. The co-op has this sign up most of the years, don't guess soil test. So I'm going to take them some of my soil and say, test this for whatever it is you test things for, and let me know what you think I should know. And we'll see, if they're, well, is this pasture land? Is this going to be cropland? What are you doing with it? Hopefully, they're going to want more information. But I suspect they're going to assume it's cropland and they're going to try and sell me fertilizers. That's what I suspect. There are at-home type tests that we can do to check aggregation in our soil. Is it Ray Archuleta? I think it's Ray Archuleta. Goes off about a few of those very interesting tests, and they are quite interesting. I will be trying some of those in the yard, and I'm going to sneak into the field before they actually plant it next year. And I'm going to compare and see, how our lawn does, how our garden area does, and how the back field does. I have no idea. Like, my gardening policies have not necessarily been the greatest for soil health up to this point. So I may have made it better. I may have made it worse. I really don't know. Half of my garden, just gets, it's lawn last year, it's garden this year. We're moving forward. Everybody around here is like, you got to turn it at least twice over the years so you can kill all the stuff that's in there and get rid of any seeds that are, or weed seeds that are going to try and grow up. And it's like, man, pull the weeds, feed them to your chickens. I don't care. I'm not worried about pulling the weeds here and there. The thistles got to be a little intense, but if I had something that was grazing that would be a different story. I'm sure it would be a much different story. So, yes. Oh, my leg's falling asleep from the way I'm sitting there. So, excuse me as I wiggle about a bit. So yeah, does anybody have kind of any questions in regards to soil health, in regards to keeping the rain where it falls in your fields, in regards to Mr. Jimmy Emmons from Oklahoma, ranching, pasture land, meat making? We're past the half-hour point here, so I'll take anything that won't get me in trouble on YouTube for questions at this point. But I do want to say thank you to everybody who has shown up so far this evening, and to anybody who will go through and rewatch this later. It is always quite interesting to see that people are rewatching the live chats. Like I've mentioned a few times, I was kind of hoping this would be a little more interactive. So I think for the coming weeks, I need to maybe prepare more of a lecture type situation, and we might even change the camera angle. Right now, I'm just using a cheesy little webcam on my laptop, but I can always drag out the big camera. And I got a new microphone yesterday actually, in the mail. So in theory, my voice should maintain consistent volume whether I'm facing the camera or facing the blackboard. We can go to using the blackboard chalkboard. I can't speak today, to illustrate points and hopefully drive some of this home a little bit better for people. maybe people will be more comfortable asking questions if I can illustrate the answers a little bit. Yeah, basically, I'm just super excited about how possible regenerative farming seems and regenerative ranching seems compared to how impossible it seemed just a couple years ago, before I started diving into all of this stuff. When I was looking at it, going, okay, well, I'm going to need those tractors, I'm going to need those tools, those implements, I'm going to need these inputs, I'm going to need those killers, I'm going to need these pesticides and those herbicides and all of this stuff. And it's terrifying. And like that may be part of why I gravitate towards livestock to begin with. But yeah, we'll see. Eric, have I thought about doing the chat on your other channel that's bigger? I have, because it is, it's like 10 times the size of this little channel, right? But I have chosen to keep farming, homesteading, and such separate from the JT Bear channel because there are a lot of young people who watch the JT Bear channel. I've been told so by parents who watch some of those videos with their children. And so there are things that go along with homesteading that I don't necessarily want to introduce young people to until they're old enough to decide they want to find out what it is. And some of these chats will end up going off in detail about that. Herd health, herd management, culling for productivity and profit, all of these things, they're a little morbid. So yeah, it's my hope that on Bear Family Farms I can attract the viewers who are more interested in the facts of life and are more prepared to deal with the nature of existence and that death is a big part of life. Should we stop rainwater from running off the land into the ditch? Well, ideally, you don't want it to run at all. You want it to suck up like a sponge, right? So anytime water is, okay, so let's discuss that. Anytime water is running off of your land, the first thing it's doing is it's taking any loose carbon deposits, soil deposits, mulch, fertilizers that are in that top inch or so of soil, and it is making a little rolling wave of those, and it is taking them all, and as it develops momentum, it's taking more and more of them, and it's taking them off your land into the ditch, right? So you don't have flooded land, which is, on the surface is great, which is a bad pun, I guess, but on the surface, that's great. However, all your nutrients and all your good stuff that you're trying to put into your land is now in that ditch. And if it's happening on multiple fields over the course of that ditch, you're getting a lot of water moving either into some sort of a treatment facility or to somewhere where it's going to be absorbed. Now, if that water has picked up a lot of nutrients, then you're going to have a, what are they referring to this as, a saline sea situation going on wherever that water is collecting, because as water sits, it pulls up salts from the soil, and then it collects in that water and it runs and it flows and it creates bigger problems somewhere else. So ideally, we want to catch it. We want it to be either baffled by litter on the ground, trampled in by our animals, or just left behind from our cover crops, or, you know, just rolled over and killed and planted into it. Because as the rain gets caught in the thatch, you know, we'll just, for the sake of argument, we'll call it hay, because any of this litter ultimately kind of, it's going to have the same effect, and we're all familiar with hay and straw and kind of how that looks. But as the rain lands on that, it's less likely to bounce it back up and hit your plant and potentially be a site of disease, ultimately. It's going to get sucked in. It's going to slowly suck into that like a sponge, and then it's going to slowly seep into your soil. So even if you've only got a half-inch retention per hour or so, your litter, your hay, your straw, whatever on top of the ground there is going to catch maybe another half-inch, maybe another inch. It's going to really slow down the water that's escaping from your land. So hopefully that larger amount of water will have more hours to be able to absorb and get further into your soil, encouraging the roots to go further into your soil, making it easier for future rainfall to go further into your soil. But also having that litter on there is going to slow down that rolling tidal wave that is taking all of the good stuff off the top of the soil that we are all working so hard to build. So thatch is a huge, huge solution there. You live in Texas, you need all the water it can get. Yeah, right. Oh my goodness. Again, you've got that 365 sort of garden season, but because of that, you need to really maximize as much of the water that falls in your land as possible. So, like, the math again worked out to be, I believe he said, for a half inch per hour water retention, something like 16,500 gallons that were retained per acre. So, okay, if you can even get an inch, you're now looking at 33,000 gallons in your soil to feed your plants. And in addition to it being there to feed your plants, it's not stealing your nutrients. In addition to it feeding the plants, it's because it's feeding the plants, I should say, it's encouraging that deeper root growth. It's going to help them build the soil beneath them. As it transpires through the plants are going to suck in more carbon. As the carbon goes through the plant, it's going to come out the root. As it comes out the root, it's going to feed the biology. As the biology gets consumed, it's going to feed the plant. It's this big, beautiful cycle. But when we have bare soil, it is really, really restricted in how well it can run. It's well, I'm kind of a race car guy, a NASCAR idiot. Always turn left. But picture, if you can imagine this, like us older generation, Gen X and before, we remember standards, right? Do you remember when you had to shift gears in your car? But imagine having a nice 70s Camaro that actually had a standard transmission in there, and you're running that sucker in first, and you're wondering why the buddy in the Honda Civic is cruising on by you. Well, your soil health is a lot like that. Each of these 5 different steps that the NRCS are kind of focusing on, and people like Jimmy Emmons are trying to share with people, they're like the different gears along the way. So if you've got 1 or 2 of those steps, your soil biology is going to be trucking along that little bit faster. But if you've got all 5 of them, you're going to be cruising along at maximum speed with maximum efficiency, which I think, who doesn't want to get to their destination faster, safer, cheaper, healthier, right? No matter what that destination is. I want to get there fast, safe, cheap, and healthy. Like, not cheap, but of good value. Um, so with soil biology, step 1, you get that litter mat on there. Okay, now you're starting to slow down the water that's rolling off of your land. You're starting to hold it longer so it can be retained by your land. You're changing from first to second. You've changed your entire game, even though you're driving the same car. You changed your entire game. And then when you go from, say, deep tillage to minimal soil disturbance, it's another one of those 5 aspects. So you've got like your no-till seed drill, which still kind of slices a line right through your field, and that is some disturbance, right? But that's pretty minimal compared to your old turn it, flip it, plow situation, or some sort of board plow. I don't know. I had a 79 4 on the floor of my first car. Woof. Oh. I've had a few Camaros, Firebirds, Trans Ams. They're all basically the same thing, but I unfortunately have only ever gotten my hands on automatics. I've always just kind of had to dream about what that would be like in a standard. Now, there's a happy, distracting thought. Yes, I am a motorhead. It's true. You can take the farmer out of the trailer park, but you can't take the trailer park out of the farmer, and I will always love my Camaro. And that's not necessarily a generalism. That's just me. And something that was said about me quite a lot, actually, several years ago. Made my break from the city, and that meant living in a trailer park because my dog was considered to be a vicious breed because I had a Rottweiler. He was 65 pounds, full grown. Yeah. He would play fetch all day, every day, but he was a dangerous breed, so I couldn't rent anywhere with him. So when I left the city, I ended up in a trailer park. Actually, one of the best things that ever happened to me. Very, very liberating. Yeah, I had to let go of a lot of my hangups, and when I did, I met some amazing people. Eric, living in Canada, you can drive a sports car half the year. Well, you can drive it all year round if you're suicidal, but we have people driving their Thundercats up and down the highway right now. This is real smart, but hey, you go ahead, you use that special key for your ignition that gives you all that extra horsepower. And then the paramedics will explain to your wife why you're wrapped around that telephone pole. Yeah, there are people out there who still have their motorcycles insured too, because they're convinced there's going to be that one day when the pavement's going to be clean and they're going to go for a ride in January. Whatever. As I've gotten older, I've given up on the sports cars. I'm an all-wheel drive fella now. I'm definitely a Jeep man when I can. We've got that little Ford Sophie the Scientist, so she's the Fusion, little Ford Fusion right now, which is far from a sports car and far from an all-wheel drive. But you know what? I think it's damn economical for what it costs to start the Jeep right now. I can drive for like an hour away, about the same amount of fuel. It's truly ridiculous. So apparently they made some improvements between 97 and 2011. Who knew? That's definitely off topic though. But yeah, sports car driving in the summertime. And I grew up in BC, so that was, crazy, twisty, turny mountains, sports car driving. And now I live in the prairies, fine Manitoba, and I do love the endless sky horizons that go on forever. But the driving gets a little boring. It's very long, straight, flat, gentle curve, and then another 50 kilometers of long, straight, flat, gentle dip. Ooh, terrible. Eric, got a guy at work drive his bike to work in the winter unless it snowed. Yeah, right. Well, Indiana, I don't know. What's the snow like down there? Do you guys get really deep snow, complicated snow? Do you guys have drivers who know how to behave in the snow? What amazes me is that I live in Manitoba and we got drivers around us who don't know how to drive in the snow. Like, really? As if Canada itself isn't synonymous with snow. Excuse me. Manitoba in Canada is like, everybody else in Canada is like, well, at least I don't live in Manitoba. Oh, could be worse. Yeah. I suppose it could be worse. I do live in Manitoba. I moved here of my own free will. Try to explain that to people. It doesn't go well. We get some snow, but not a whole lot. Yeah, see? So I'm guessing with the not a whole lot of snow, you probably even got a larger percentage of people that just get paralyzed from the neck up as soon as snowflakes start to fall. They forget how to drive. Everything's all skid marky. I mean, how hard is this? If there's snow on the ground, accelerate gently, decelerate gently, turn carefully. Otherwise, you're pretty much good to go. If there's snow on the ground and it's super windy, maybe not doing 20, 30 above the speed limit. Just toss it around. Yeah. Or ice. Yeah, well, that's the thing too, right? And we get these wonderful, weird little weather patterns. It warms up just enough to melt everything that's on the streets and on the gravel roads. Those are fun. And that forms ice. And then it gets nice and cold, and we'll get some fresh snow on top of that by morning. So you kind of have to guess, where's the road, where's the ice, where am I going to have traction? So a lot of that, again, comes down to accelerate gently, brake gently, start sooner, leave sooner, be prepared to get there later. Eric, some years we get a bunch, then others we get a few light snows. Yeah, I used to think I wanted a white Christmas every year more than anything. After 4 years, and I'm thinking it's going to be 5 years come, this Christmas, of white Christmases, I think I could do with the occasional year of light snow. That said, though, we seem to be kind of getting a light snow this year. Like, there's been no major dump that's kind of stuck around. There are lots of places where I could graze our yard right now if I was allowed to have livestock. Like, we've got grass showing, melting it down when we get to those 0 because 0 Canadian is like 32 Fahrenheit. So that's kind of our freezing point, right? But once it gets to that freezing thawing point, yeah, the grass that pokes up from those snows, it melts it out a little bit. And it's weird this year. It's really, really weird. Either that or the little peppers that I left in the garden are blocking way more snow than I had ever anticipated. And normally, you know, because they're a couple inches taller in the peppers with the snow. So like maybe that snow would have blown across the lawn and pushed it down by now. I don't know. But I do know that I'm really glad I left the lawn nice and long as compared to everybody else in the neighborhood who was like, oh, it's going to snow tomorrow. I'm out there in the riding lower lawnmower on like its lowest setting. Their lawns are going to be so brown in the spring. We're just going to be all like green. Their lawns are going to have ponds and puddles on them. Our lawn is going to be drained. So, yeah. And they look at me like I'm an idiot. All right. Eric, my goats are still grazing and haven't fed them at all, and they're fat. Nice. Yeah, a little jelly there, man. But you've got so much beautiful forage for those goats to munch on. And I mean, the last video I saw, you were just showing kind of some of the areas that they have gotten to and some of the areas that you want them to get to. And I think that's the one where I commented about the electric fence. But wow, you've just got so much green there. It's great. I left mine long as well, thinking ahead for the goats. Yeah. Well, and they're goats, so don't be afraid to let them munch on those leaves and stuff too. Like they're not necessarily just after the grass, from what I understand. That's another thing too. Looking at livestock, I kind of think the ultimate livestock herd has some cattle, some goats, and some sheep moving as a group, because then you're going to get a really consistent consumption of what's in your pasture. One of those 3 species is going to be interested in whatever is green out there and growing. So that to me really seems like maximizing the potential from your pasture. And, on a business level, that's what it's all about, right? We need the return on these things. And on a family level, it's about we need the meat on these things. Well, chickens, I think, are the follow through, right? Like Joel Saladman does it. He'll run the cattle and then, he'll run the chickens after that with his Millennium chick ship or whatever he calls that thing. And yeah, he gets a ton of eggs out of that, and they bust up the cow patties. And I have some questions actually about that for him. And who knows, maybe one day I'll even get to pose them. But if he has problems with cow patties building up so that he needs the chickens to go through them and eat the fly larvae so the flies don't harass the cattle, does that mean that he is chemically treating parasites on his cattle and that the dung beetles aren't carrying that down into his ground for him? Or does that mean that there's just so much of it left because he's intensely grazing the cattle that it really doesn't matter how much the dung beetles get? The flies are still going to be in there, and the chickens are still going to need to work that aspect of it. So, yes, someday, if I ever got the opportunity to travel around North America, I tell you what, I would harass and annoy so many regenerative farmers. Get camera right in their face. Now, can you just answer this question? Because I watched 900 videos with you, and in every video, you fail to cover this one fairly important to me anyway topic. So if you'd be so kind. And that too, that's another reason that I'm making these particular chat videos, in the hope that we can engage in the chat, is because people see things differently, and maybe I'm just not picking it up. And he says it in all of his videos. He is feeding the chickens with the beetles. Well, there you go. One hopes that's not doing too much damage to his overall population. But I'm in no position to question Mr. Salad Man and the effectiveness of what he's doing, because he's doing it right. Clearly what he's doing is working well. He's employing a lot of people. They're turning over a lot of money. I mean, yeah, a lot of that money he goes back out in wages, But that's great. That's human equity, right? That's teaching people how to do this. That's, to some extent, that is building a local legacy. All of these people that he has taught on his farms, as interns and as employees, will be able to go out and take that knowledge and improve their own situations with it. And it's just, oh, it's super incredible. It's super incredible. I need to find more of these people in Canada so I don't have to worry about crossing the line, and I can go check out various things. And actually, I've discussed with Shocks, the speaker that I'm going to introduce tomorrow, about 5 hours away driving. So that's not bad. I can do that in a tank of gas. No big deal. Burger, French fries, chocolate shake, be there before you know it, right? Um, not the healthiest travel food, but hey, we all get our cheat days. So, do you want any pigs? Do I want pigs? Yeah, I absolutely want pigs, but I got to be out of the barn first because biosecurity. But yeah, and the longer I stay at the barn, the more desperately I want pigs. I want to raise these beautiful, intelligent, creative creatures in a more natural environment and let them truly express themselves as animals. It hurts me so much, watching what goes on in this industrial barn because I am so deeply part of the regenerative agriculture movement, and there's so much good that they could be doing on land, right? Like talking about the goat situation, running your goats, again, assuming one has the electric fence, running your goats to clear out, a lot of the foliage and leaves and stuff in any given area, and then running some pigs through there afterwards. They're going to really rip up that soil even more. They're going to aerate it even more. And, just the life that's going to come out of the ground after those two particular herds have been through a chunk of future silvopasture, ex timber stand, however, whatever stage of it you're at there. I think it's a beautiful combination, and I absolutely intend to take advantage of that in the long run. Part of my current plan, although, we'll see when it comes time to do it, but part of my current plan is to clean up timberlands on whatever property that we get to start creating silvopasture. And in those cleaned up areas, I will end up kind of bale grazing the cattle in the wintertime so that they're protected from a bit more of the wind and snow. And then once the cattle have been through there in the wintertime, I'm hoping to pick up or breed, ideally breed, but probably for the first few years, pick up piglets. And I'll just get runts from the barn because I can get them. I'm sure I'll be able to get them nice and cheap because otherwise they're floor hammers, right? So the barn's making money off of something that otherwise would have gone into the dumpster. So yeah, I'm sure I can get them cheap. But then, yeah, it's put them in a barn for a couple of weeks, put them in a yard, train them to hot wire. Once they're trained to the hot wire, those pigs are going to be out rooting through what the cattle left behind. And I'm sure the flavor of that pork as compared to what we get from the store, or, even the yearly bonus hog that we get from the barn. I'm looking forward to the gift of meat from my employer, but I am not overly excited about how that meat will taste. I'm thrilled because Shocks and I have a fantastic understanding of how to use herbs and spices to improve modern food, but I suspect it's going to be some very bland pork that comes out of those girls. And yeah, Eric, I always felt bad for them as well. And how can you work in that situation and not feel bad for them? Like, I look at some of these guys at work and they're just clearly so immune to it now. They don't even think about it. We'll just stack this one up on top of the deads, and it's Wednesday. So actually today it's Wednesday. So they clean out the dead room, and it all goes into these dumpsters, and the dumpsters get picked up by Thursday morning, and they get used for, and I quote my manager, "I don't even want to know what they're using them for." Well, that's a shame. These are lives. So as I mentioned last week, I am really, really enjoying the fact that right now we are on a no kills unless absolutely necessary situation because we've got 6 months coming where we have no replacement hogs coming in. So they have no choice but to let those ladies who are productive but maybe a little bit older live. So excellent. I've cooked pork roast in good taste, that barn in the meat before. Well, from like industrial raised hogs, well, that's good to know. But like I say, I'm not overly excited about it. I do believe that a varied diet makes for a more flavorful meat. I believe that is why my personal palate will happily choose venison over beef. Um, and I do think it's the wild stuff because I've noticed with a couple of things when we do get like the leaner cuts of steak because it's a good price or whatever, it's like, oh, hey, quick fryer steak. Yeah, steak sandwich. And who doesn't love a good steak sandwich and a big Caesar salad? It's a nice, yummy meal. It's an easy to be excited about kind of meal. But, the ones where they are marbled and the ones where they aren't marbled, there is such a significant difference in flavor. And my brain automatically associates that marbling with a varied diet, a slightly more stressed existence, closer to heritage breeding, and just all these little things. So when I think about the commercial hogs that we have, because this was broken down for me the other day, the genetics are figured out in something called a nucleus barn. And they are told every day which sow to breed with which boar. And then the piglets from all of those litters have their tails clipped and they're sent off for DNA testing. And the lucky ones from there go off to multiplier barns where they grow up to be the 6-month-old gilts that come into our farrowing barn. Like there's too much science going into this meat. It bothers me a little bit. You did the breeding. Like, is that breeding at a nucleus barn? Is that breeding at a farrowing barn? I mean, I find that whole nucleus barn thing fascinating in an intensely scientific sort of way. And, I think it's cool what we can do with science. But I think at the same time, the way we used to breed our livestock for the qualities that made them better livestock it's gone. And that's kind of part of what I was bringing up last week with Johann Zietzman. And we need to breed for better body condition in the animals. And like the hogs at work, these girls are not bred for body condition. These girls are bred to be able to produce multiple piglets and to produce large amounts of lean meat, because those piglets need to produce large amounts of lean meat. And today is the perfect example. There was a necessary cull today. She's only 3 litters in. So that's a year and a half with us plus 6 months. This is a 2-year-old sow. Could be potentially productive for many more years, but her body condition score was so low that no one in the barn, even merciful me, felt that there was any way we could bring her back to a breeding condition in a reasonable amount of time. And her body condition was so low that every single one of those piglets also obviously suffered from it. And that is because of what's going on at those nucleus barns, because they're breeding for numbers in production and lean meat. And lean meat does not necessarily mean you've got good body condition. And if you don't have good body condition, you're going to have a real hard time rebreeding. So breeding lean meat for a breeding situation seems counterproductive. It's like spraying nitrogen on your field so you can have more weeds to pull. Why bother? Save the money. Save the time. And this is one of the things that really grinds my gears, as it were, to use a Peter Griffin thing. we have these girls, they're on, litter number 9. And, our cards keep track of everything. So we've got the last 5 or 6 litters on there, plus their overall litter average, live born, stillborn. Like, we know everything about these animals by looking at their cards. And the last few months that I've been working there before this current guilt situation set itself up, I have been kind of complaining to the boss because we have animals that are on their 9th litter, which means, they're 4.5 years with us. They're 5-year-old sows. They've got good numbers. They've got good body conditioning. Their hooves are in excellent shape, but we're slaughtering them just because they're old. But these girls clearly have the right set of genetics for the barn scenario. So I think we should be taking some of these proven 4.5, 5-year-old girls and getting our breeding from them, like, to make our future gilts. But that's when I explained my position on that. That's when the boss told me all about these nucleus barns and multiplier barns and blah, blah, blah. And basically, in his opinion, it's more of a pain in the tuchus than it's worth. But when it comes to us individual livestockers, ranchers, homesteaders, farmers, we have the opportunity to go, okay, well, I don't have to kill this one just because it's old. I can keep it because it's got these qualities that I am looking for. I am looking for an animal that's got good fat. So in the case of pork, so that it will cure well, so that I can have those nice flavorful hams. I am looking for an animal that can live to a ripe old age and continue to give me good, consistent litters. Maybe they're not going to be 12, 14 per. I don't need that many piglets. 6, 8, I'm good. If that's not enough, I'll get another sow. Breed 2 of them. 1 happy boar, 2 happy sows. Not a big deal. They can live in the barn in the wintertime. They can go out with their piglets in the spring and summer. If they're wire trained, their piglets will be wire trained. It all goes with it, right? So yeah, I don't know. The whole commercial breeding thing in general, I think chickens are about the only place they've got it right. And even then, they don't really have it right. The chickens that are being bred as dual purpose birds, like the ones that we got, these Colombian, Plymouth Rock, Red. So there's 4 types of bird that have been mixed into this breed, but they have been bred so that they're winter hardy. They produce large eggs consistently, regardless of the amount of light that they get. So we're actually getting too many eggs as our situation right now. I tried turning down the light in their long shed, and I'm still getting. I got a dozen eggs today from 13 birds, 3 of which should have been retired long since. That said, I haven't had a white egg in a really long time. But, like with chicken breeding, there seem to be 3 different directions that they have gone. They've gone with your layer hens. So they're focusing only on the qualities of the females, and those qualities need to be lots of consistent eggs. We don't really care about much else because they're going to be kept in batteries and cages and all that stuff in most scenarios. We're talking industrial here, right? And then you've got your meat birds that are being bred to put on the weight, nice and fat. But again, they're being bred for lean meat. I mean, not like a chicken's going to have a lot of fat on it to begin with, but they're being bred for lean meat. And sometimes these things grow so fast, they develop difficulties like, and I'm not talking about a teenage boy with long bone who's, oh, my knees hurt a little bit. I'm talking about like screwed up legs and stuff because they're eating too much, because all they want to do is eat, sleep, and poop, because that's packing on the calories, packing them on. And, we've got that aspect of chicken breeding. Then we've got our dual purpose chicken breeding as our third and final sort of option. And that's what most homesteaders go with. We're going with kind of a meatier bird that will lay fairly consistently and survive a winter well, right? So we've got kind of all the characteristics that we need in a good natural-ish bird with our dual purpose birds. But cattle for sure really need to go back into that route. We've got our dairy animals, and we've got our meat animals, and then we've got our heritage animals that the homesteaders are doing. So I mean, it's kind of like that, but I think a lot more of the industrial animals need to kind of get a little bit closer to the homesteading animals, and I think they're going to save themselves a lot of money when they do. It's ridiculous what ranchers will pay for a really stellar 5-star stud bull. I heard about one that sold for over $1 million. $1 million. End of the day, that sucker's ending up on a plate anyway. Okay, but he's worth that $1 million because it takes less feed to put on those pounds of lean meat, and he grows up nice and big, and he's going to knock up all these girls who also are going to have no body condition, and so they're going to have a hell of a time getting pregnant and having calves. But we're not worried about that. We're worried about if we get a steer, we want him to be big. So like we're discounting half of the animals being born to that concept of breeding. It's terrible. Barnyard chicken. The flavor of bacon has changed, and it just does not cook right anymore. Tried many different brands the last 2 years. It's getting worse. Yeah, right. And I think it has to do with the diets and the feeds and the lack of, well, it comes down to it again, the lack of diversity. Their microbiome and their gut has been conditioned basically from birth for a pelletized feed that just kind of, I don't think people even really inspect this stuff anymore, for quality control. It's not good. I'm sure at some level it is inspected. I'm sure at some level the nutrient content is verified. I'm sure at some level all of these lies that we tell ourselves about agriculture, are being taken care of. But that ranks right up there with, yeah, I'm sure risk assessment was done on this pesticide and it's okay to spray. Right? Is it? Is it really? Was a proper assessment done? We don't know. We don't know. We just have to hope. And we tell ourselves that because we hope, it's going to be okay. And I think that's the way it goes with the chicken feed that I'm giving the girls to make it through the winter until our weeds start growing in the chaos garden again. Or, to some extent, even like the hay cubes that people are feeding their cattle and their horses to get through the winter. You don't really know what's in that. You just know it's compressed grains. Taking a lot on faith there, man. Would you have any guinea fowl and ducks? Me? Absolutely. I think guinea fowl are ridiculously cute, and ducks as well, really. When we're on land, I'm going to be really exploring fowl in general, because I have found a hatchery, the Berg hatchery in Russell, where we got this last batch of chicks. I was very happy with the way I was treated, very happy with the health of the animals that I received. I'm, 10 for 10. They all lived through it. 10 for 10 were female. You can't argue with that. And looking at their prices for even, the exotic chickens, Asian geese, they have quite an amazing variety of fowl available. So if I contact them and get, a shipment of one thing or whatever, I could probably get it all kind of bunched in. And we will definitely be moving into ducks, geese, turkeys, guinea fowl, the whole shebang, because I want as many leavings from as many different gut bacterial scenarios on my land as I can get, because I believe that is what is going to really help build the diversity of my microbiology. And ultimately, it sure seems like the more diverse your microbiology is, the better your plants are going to do, the better your plants do, and the more diverse they are, the better your microbiology is going to do. So if I take care of the little guys under the soil, they'll take care of what's growing in the soil, and it'll be better to take care of what's grazing on it, and I'll get better money, better profits, and better nutritional value out of my livestock, because I've taken care of the very bottom of this, which is not the soil, not the plants, but the microbiology that's down there. So it's there's a lot that goes into it, and I mean, as Eric pointed out in one of our previous conversations, it is not necessarily cheaper to raise your own meat. It is, in fact, more expensive most of the time to do it that way, because and we'll take again the chickens. You go to the hatchery and you get your chicks. These chicks that I got were $4.40 something each. the cheapest chicks that I could get work out to, I think it was $1.97 if you buy 100 or more of them. So, come the situation when we're on land, I'll be buying these things in 100 lots because those are going to be my meat birds. But it's just, then you got to pay for feed on top of that. You got to pay for your infrastructure on top of that. And at the end of the day, it would have been cheaper to go to the Big W, get yourself a chicken. At the end of the day, you can go to a Sobeys, okay, and I think you guys have Sobeys down there. You can go to a Sobeys, and you can go to the meat department, and you're going to look at $16 for a raw chicken, whole chicken, not cut up or anything. $16, give or take. Kind of, that's what it cost last time I was at a Sobeys, okay? Or you can go to the deli department and get one that's already been cooked for $10. If you go for the $16 on that, then you get the side salad, you get the side macaroni, you get the little buns that go with it. I mean, we're all familiar with the chicken deal from the grocery store. I think most of us are anyway. So how is it that they can make it so much cheaper that way, right? And it's even cheaper to have it cooked. There is so much questionable stuff going on. Excuse me. But what that ultimately comes down to is government subsidies. It's not that it's cheaper for them to raise the animal than it is for us. And it's not that per pound that flesh actually costs less. It's that because they have dominion over the government as a corporate authority, they can apply for subsidies. So even though, let's say it costs them $10 to make the chicken, because that's what they're selling it for cooked, so we'll just use that, $10, right? It costs them $10 to raise the chicken. They're selling it for $3, which means they're taking a $7 loss. Now, there are a couple of ways that they can do that. They can use that $7 lost against $7 of other profit and not have to pay taxes that way. Or they can apply for a subsidy to the government because they're losing money in order to compete with the market. So the government will give them that $7 on top of the 3, so they're still getting their 10. So they're getting 10 and we're getting 10, but our competition is only paying 3 to them, whereas our competition is paying 10 to us. Like, does this make sense to anybody? You kind of getting how this works? Mom was an accountant, so it makes sense to me. I understand it. But you can get a whole chick cooked for like $5 at Walmart. Well, see, that's it too. But you got to remember, the American dollar is a lot stronger than the Canadian dollar. So that factors into a lot of the prices that I'll list for things. And yeah, the American market, again, now I don't want to be talking bad about government policies or nothing, because YouTube's a very sensitive place these days. But the American market is even more subsidized than the Canadian market is. And right now, thinking of the Canadian subsidy situation, apparently right now, raising pork in raising pork in Manitoba commercially can only be affordably done if you're getting all the subsidies, because there is so much pork being raised in Manitoba right now that it doesn't demand a high enough commodity price. So if you're trying to sell it commercially without those subsidies, so like a small farmer, say me, I raised my 16 piglets or whatever over the course of the year. I want to go off. I want to sell them at the auction house or at the sell them at auction, production sale barn, whatever, right? I'm competing with people that have these big GST numbers and PST numbers, and they've got all this stuff for all of their tax rebates and deductions and subsidies. And they're going to get that extra money back from the government for the money they lost raising those pigs because of what they got at market. Whereas as a small farmer, homesteader, I will get the money that I got for those pigs, and that's all. So that is why it is to the benefit of us smallholding individuals to market more directly via Facebook or CSAs or farm memberships or whatever, so that we can get a more reasonable price for our produce, meat, whatever you want, whatever you're raising, right? If it's veggies, then veggies. If it's meat, then meat. If it's grains, then you probably want to sell it as seed for your real money rather than trying to sell it to an elevator. Or you're going to want to say you're growing corn, grind it up so you've got cornmeal, sell it as cornmeal. You're going to get way more than you are selling it as a bushel to the elevator. It is absolutely outrageous, and it's all because of those government subsidies. So if somebody were to get uptight and say, well, we've got to stop the subsidies, we've got to make it fair, we've got to level the playing field. Wow, would our food security go downhill fast? Would our prices go uphill fast? Because you know what? Those guys who are still used to getting their $10 per chicken, getting back to the case of Walmart and their cheap ass chickens, those guys are still going to want their $10 per chicken. So everybody's used to going to spend $3, now spending 10, just like if they were buying it from us. So that's great and everything, but can you imagine the public uproar? Because if you think about it in percentages, the percentage of people that shop in large box store situations so that they can get that more affordable meat that's covered by subsidies versus the percentage of people that are willing to go out and trust a farmer, get to know a farmer, actually go to a field, see what it really looks like, get to know their meat, and then enjoy something of quality. Well, there's a much larger percentage of Walmart farmers, or it wouldn't be such a monster, right? Now, I feel like I should pick on a different company at this point, but we're all familiar with the corporate giant. So, Eric, there's going to be one big demand for pork because the Asian countries' pigs are getting a virus and dying. Yeah, African swine flu is traveling through feed supplies, and we have been warned about it at our barn. And basically, anybody caught bringing meat from outside of Canada into that lunchroom can look for a new job. It's kind of the way the notice came down. It's hardcore. And according to my manager, I think he was saying they're expecting it to wipe out like a quarter to a third of the porcine population in the next 10 years. It's crazy. And, like from everything I've heard in my own research and at work, it seems like it's coming through the feed supply chain because these grains get shipped all over the world, which means by the time they actually get somewhere, they've traveled more than the average farmer. So what's the point of that? Just grow your own damn feed, and you're probably not going to be dealing with that situation because it's not coming in on the feed. Seems pretty straightforward. Seems like another one of those situations where industrial farming is screwing over industrial farming. And if more people had the opportunity to homestead and raise it on their own, I don't think it would be anywhere near as bad. But yeah, big demand in the pork in the future is great because we got 20 barns in our progressive group, and my job is therefore secure because we make those bacon seeds and they travel all over Canada. Most of them actually go to the States, but we ship a lot of them all over Canada, all over the States. 1,200 a week. Some weeks we do 2,500 piglets we ship out of our place. So that's ultimately that's good because biosecurity is a big issue at my barn, and that means my job is secure. That said, I still don't want it, and I want to get away from it as soon as I can. And it's just rough. I saw where America did this to them, to the Asians. Because as far as I know, we're under threat of African swine flu. So I just assumed this was coming from Africa initially. Easy enough to spread, through the Middle East into the Asiatic territories just through food chain supply and demand, right? Yeah, not good. Industrial farming in general, though, you're looking at so much more potential for disease, discomfort, things like that. It's just, yeah, I would like to see the world need industrial farms less, and I would like to see the world turn to homesteaders more. But unfortunately, the same people that are getting the subsidies for those low prices are getting away with giving people ridiculously low wages that they can't even afford to They can't even afford to buy those meats at those low prices, let alone, fully live or buy healthy foods. It's outrageous. Something needs to be done, and there needs to be a big shakeup on that. But money is it's different everywhere, so you can't really, without going the whole one world government route, and that's not a real popular one right now either. We released it. Conspiracy. Yeah, well, in theory, we released lots of things. Is there any actual proof of that? Or is it one country blaming another country, blaming another country? Or is it people looking for an excuse? Or is it just we don't want to admit that the situation comes from this style of farming? That's, again, one of the things Dr. Jonathan Lundgren was going off about, is that science is kind of for sale, and we kind of form our opinions based on the largest body of evidence. So if somebody comes out with a theory and evidence that says your product is bunk or you're doing something wrong, the only way to really deal with that is to go pay a bunch of scientists and come up with a body of evidence that supports your position. And anybody who's ever really done a scientific test that can honestly assess the situation can tell you that, yeah, I'm going to get the outcome I want if there is an outcome I want. So, trade wars with China and other Asian countries. Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, I understand about trade wars and all that stuff. And basically, we're all flexing our financial e-peens on each other. Trade embargoes and all this stuff. Oh, we're a big government. Oh, no. That's all stupid games in theory anyway. But it doesn't make sense to me, and now this may just be because I suffer from common sense. It doesn't make sense to me to introduce a disease to a foreign country's food supply when ultimately that food is going to make it back to you, and diseases travel. It is so completely illogical that on one hand, you almost think the government must have done it. And on the other hand, you have to ask yourself, how could any sane individual in governance go, this is a good idea? How could somebody think that was a good idea? It's just stupid. The world has gotten to be an incredibly stupid place, So what do? You go out and you fight against the stupidity, and everybody, tells you what an idiot you are. Who was it, George Orwell? And when it gets to a point where people aren't speaking the truth, or the more lies are believed, the less people. I don't remember the actual quote, but basically it's another one of those 1984 things. This has all been predicted. This is all written out, plain as day. In my case, I never actually read 1984. I read the Mission Earth series by L. Ron Hubbard. 10 books. They're all pretty thick as hardcovers. Even as paperbacks, they're all pretty thick. But at the same time, while not 1984, it does very nicely, neatly lay out for you what we see going on around us. And those books were written, late 60s, early 70s. But it's all about what's going on with the gender confusion in society, all of what's going on with the addiction problems that society is facing, and all of the counter science that's going on. It's all there. It's all written, bold text right there. Put on a pair of glasses and read it. It's absolutely incredible. But people don't read. People watch movies, and movies don't put that stuff in there because it doesn't make good viewing and it doesn't fill seats. So even when good books, can you imagine if they made 1984 into a movie for today's population? It would be so toned down that the actual message of the story would be completely lost. And it would, if there's any sex and violence in there, that would be glorified. Special effects would be driven through the roof, and plot line would be, like I say, cut up so bad you don't get that the point is apparently Big Brother will always be watching you. Big Brother is watching. And then you get people like me who's, yeah, okay, Big Brother, I don't care if you're watching here. I have a camera. Do you like what I'm doing now? Oh, I don't care. I don't care. I'm going to continue to share my message of you can do it. I believe in you. You should believe in you. I'm going to continue to share my message of the Ubuntu, theory that if it's not good for all of us, it's not good for any of us. Um, yeah, and I'm going to continue to share the ideas and theories that we can, as a society, as a species, be nicer to each other. We can be nicer to the planet. We can be nicer to our animals that we raise. We can be nicer to the plants that we raise. And that's a funny one. When you get to mentioning how people treat plants, you really bring the trolls out of the woodwork. In one of my videos on the JT Bear channel just years ago, I was going off about pruning tomatoes to stress them and force fruiting, because the theory behind that is when you're pruning a plant like that, it is given the impression on a genetic basis or a genetic level that it is being consumed and it needs to reproduce. Survival of the species is very real amongst plants, animals, everything. Everything wants to survive. So I said that in a video, right? And I got so many comments along the lines of, so are you saying plants feel? Are you saying that plant can think? And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's thinking better than you are right now, because how did plants make it this long otherwise, bro? And then, of course, there's all that boomer versus millennial stuff that goes through my head. But I'm a Generation Xer, so it's even worse than that. Yeah. Generation X. The boomers hated us when we were the kids. How do you like us now? Ha! Better than millennials, right? But anyway, yeah, it is my hope that through things like sharing on the internet and through these new technologies that we are developing and these new methods of communication, we can share with each other the things that we need to learn to grow a better society, to grow better crops, to grow better farms. And hopefully we can lead by example with, all these videos and stuff that we share. And we can show people that there is a better way, because you'll never change a system by fighting against it. I think it was Buckminster Fuller is this kind of a generalization of one of his thoughts. So the only way you can really change it is by going inside it and teaching it a new way, or stepping outside of it and showing it a better way. And when people see that is in fact better, they don't fight against it. They go, oh, well, it's a good decision for that, or whatever of the reasons. And, maybe, just maybe, all of this effort that I'm putting into this particular playlist and all of this time I spend babbling with you guys in these chats will make a difference in one future farmer's life. And just maybe that one future farmer can do a little something to save a little piece of land, to treat their livestock a little bit better, to raise livestock that's not going to suffer as much just by its genetic makeup, because it's bred for body conditioning instead of bred to be a monstrous, freakish, modern agricultural animal. Yeah, who knows? You're never going to change, you're never going to change anything if you don't try, which is kind of what I was always brought up to believe. So yeah, I am just going to keep on trying. And on that note, I think I'm going to wrap it up. We're at an hour and 33 minutes. I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight, keeping it going in the chat there, Eric. I really appreciate that. If there is anything in particular that anyone is interested in learning more about, can always mention it in the comments after this video gets processed and published for rewatching later. Or, well, just bring it up on any of the Bear Family Farms videos in the comments, and I'll get to it sooner or later. Because, I am diving down these rabbit holes, interested in what I need to learn. But I have a different way of learning things than a lot of people. I was raised by a lot of teachers. So that, I think, probably factors in. But if, there's information you're interested in and you can't find, who knows? Maybe my different way of searching for things, maybe I'll be able to find it. So ask, and I will do my best to answer any questions I can. Otherwise, yes, thanks to the comments from last week's video, I have chosen tomorrow's speaker, and I hope, very much hope, that if you guys get a chance to listen to his lectures, you'll kind of get an idea as to why I believe that cover cropping is not as impossible as it might seem in all of these situations. So yeah, I'm going to say much love, everybody. Have yourselves an absolutely fantastic night. I'll be back tomorrow with that, well, here's your homework video, and I'll be back on Sunday looking at what's going on. But there may be new videos popping up on the random channels because I do have that new mic, so I want to test it. And part of testing it means, well, playing outside and all kinds of stuff. So yes, it's going to be interesting. Thank you guys for joining me. Much love. And yeah, take care of yourselves, take care of your farms, take care of each other. Just be a good human. Lead by example. You got this shit.